All right, so good morning, good afternoon, or just good day to wherever you are. Welcome, everyone. We're going to talk today about movement exploration. My name is Kelli Sharp, and Jill, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Jill McNitt-Gray.
Yeah, and I'm from UCI, and Jill is from USC. All right, so go ahead and let's get started, and I'll be asking questions, and this is a very interactive lecture, so please be prepared to, engage oneself when one feels comfortable to do so. So our agenda for today is as follows. We're going to talk about the goals and objectives of the pop-up science project. We're going to really think about what is movement. And the third part is what is functional movement? There's something very different within that. And what information is important to gather while studying movement task. And the fifth thing is we're going to do breakout groups to determine the IMSI obstacle course task and interest and why are we picking those obstacles? All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. And if any time you have any questions, I can't see you, so just blurt it out. How about that? All right, so the next thing to think about is our research questions for this pop-up science project is we're really thinking about how do humans navigate challenging environments, right? So does the surface change? Does that change the force? Is that going to change the center of mass? And we're really thinking about, we'll focus on foot placement, strategies relative to center of mass trajectories, and determine what individuals value in their decision-making approach. The next thing is really thinking about what is movement? So, can somebody give me their definition of what is movement? Anyone have any thoughts?
A change in position over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Anybody else want to add something else? Okay. Yeah, so it's a specific instance of changing position, which might have a direction or a purpose, right? And then the next thing to think about is what is the difference between what is movement and what is functional movement? So you can see here, a functional movement is where there's a specific instance of changing position, which might have a direction or purpose to complete a specific task. Now, we all know, like, for example, this is actually an example of a sit to stand and a measurement called the tug, which is a timed up and go task, right? So, other functional movements, like you can think about how do you grab your toothbrush and brush your teeth, right? How do you use, and the thing about the tug and the sit to stand is that we do this on a daily basis to get up and move, right? But from a functional perspective, what does that look like? So we're really thinking about modifications that you can think about with configuration, relative reaction force, and load distribution, right? So if you change a position of center of mass within this, you're going to change the effect of the load distribution. So we're thinking about what are the different types of functional movements that we can look at within our obstacle course, right? And relate that to different changes in these different configurations of segments. All right, so the next thing to think about is here we're going to talk a little bit about our data collection setup. So far, we're thinking about using iPads or iPhones on tripods, collecting timestamp data in 2D footage. And then the second part that we're working on is really thinking about how we can use a drone collecting overhead data. And then the third part is integrating. So before I go into the third through fifth part, let's look at this video right here. And so this is actually a drone footage of an athlete at, I think, is this USC?
It's USC. So we've
Yeah.
got portable force plates out in the track, and we have the drone just fixed position overhead collecting high-speed video. But it gives
Yep.
a unique perspective of center mass trajectory and feet positions, right? Especially in the acceleration phase.
Yeah, so one of our goals in our team is working like how can we take the 2D data and then also with the drone data and integrate it with AlphaPose and Deep Lab Cut to see what information we can actually collect. And we do know that this is going to be an interesting feat in some ways. but we're excited to see how we can navigate this. And then thinking about how do we set up a data processing pipeline, and then thinking about how the data input into various models that the whole group is working on as well. So this is really where we're thinking. We love to think about, how things can, what are our processes? How can those processes translate to other models? So the next thing to think about is objectives for our task. What information is important to gather while studying movement tasks? So, for example, center of mass, right? Foot position relative to center of mass trajectory is also very important. And let's take a second and watch this video of the U.S. national amputee soccer. Hope everyone can see it. And these are expert hoppers, right? So, right. So that just gives you another example of how different, center of mass and foot position is relative. So the next thing that we're going to talk about here is thinking, oops, see the video again. Sorry about that. The next thing to think about is in our obstacle course that we want to design, we want y'all to think about what are different tasks that we could use and why would we want to use them if we're looking at foot placement relative to center of mass. But also, there are two main key things to think about here. One is we want to think about this is going to be pop-up, right? So we don't want to have to build anything, right? We want to use simple objects, right? We want to have something that is going to be also accessible, right? Can be used across all different abilities, right? And then the third thing is thinking about, what is the why? What is that task? What are we going to learn from that task, right? And does it relate back to something functional?
I
So,
have a question for you, Kelly. In
yeah.
hopping task, the expert hoppers, how do you look at use of tools basically when you're doing these types of tasks and measuring these? Like how does that play into your analysis, like using the crutches in that video?
Yeah, those sister devices.
Hmm.
Yeah. Jill, do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah,
We'll
so
talk about how we do with
basically,
wheelchairs. Yeah.
yeah, so it's basically looking at assistive devices, right? So how does the assistive device assist? And so we typically take a mechanical approach and start with, well, what's the free body diagram? What forces are available to you? Whether you're putting hands on hand rims and pushing a wheelchair or using crutches to create forces. And you can see from the variety of tasks, even in this practice drill, how there is a lot of strategy in where you're putting uh, contact points relative to the center of mass to then perform the functional aspects of the task, whether it's and usually and even in the simple tasks that you saw in the amputee soccer, the mechanical objective is not to fall over and also play the ball in a way that you can bring out the best in your players around you, right? So there's a lot that goes into the trade-offs. And I think in talking with a number of the different core leaders on MC is hopping is a very convenient task that we look at. It has a contact and a flight phase, has a lot of different mechanical objectives. And while it's relatively simple to understand, it actually brings a lot of complexities to trade-offs that individuals are making. So I would think of it as you have a mechanical objective at the whole system level, and the question is, how do you use your reaction forces during ground contact to help you achieve the objective of the task? So it's just part of the system, right? And we've done some interesting things with putting load cells in crutches and instrumenting wheels. If we can't measure the reaction forces, say like with a force plate, we can get a sense of that interaction by doing some instrumentation on the assistive devices. So that gives us a complete free body diagram to better understand how they're coordinating force generation to do the task as they do it. I don't know, Kelly, you may want to add too about
Yeah,
configuration and wheelchairs. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So we have used a lot of like force mats or load cells in a wheelchair, like underneath the, pelvis, and understanding, then also looking at the change in trajectory of stability within the trunk, right? So so that also adds, but it's still the whole person and you look at it's not, you don't have to, it's looking at the whole model, right? But there are ways to collect data of what's going on within, especially within a wheelchair. And then also looking at, it's tricky on the wheels, right? Like adding load cells on the wheels. We've done a lot of that, trying to figure out what's the force. I work with a collaborator where we're trying to create devices that you're changing the load from the shoulder. So the load that is necessary from the shoulder to actually propel a wheelchair is, 10% of what it should be, right? So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I think that there's navigated it pretty well, and we look at the whole system, and it doesn't change in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Okay, Jill, this
Well,
is
I think
awesome.
we're gonna go to breakouts,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oops,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up different breakout groups. And what we want you to think about in these breakout groups is one, we want you to identify, how about we say you identify 2 to 3 tasks and why? And I want you to make sure that you keep in mind, right, that these tasks need to be something that we can set up with little or, little materials, if that makes sense. And also, why would you have that obstacle? What are you trying to learn from it? What's the objective? What is the learning outcome from that? And how does it really think about center of mass relevant to foot placement or relevant to whatever the task is? Anything else there, Jill?
Yeah, I think the other part too is you're gonna be randomly assigned to different groups. And so I think some of the things I've learned from working with the different core leads and there's gonna be some interesting things about individuals' capacities that you can figure out, like that sit to stand example, how someone self-selects where they put their ankle relative to the knee may give you some clues of how they are taking advantage of their ratio of strengths of the knees and the hips to get out of the chair. So there may be some technical things you might be able to pick up. I think also if we go back to some of the work loop work that we saw previously in some of our workshops is really thinking about what we can learn in terms of force, velocity, and lengths, whether it be muscle, tendon units. And then I think this also brings up maybe looking at different surfaces as well as how might we be strategic in the setup to learn a little bit more about what's the role of the tendon versus the muscle in the muscle tendon unit. So we're trying to keep the research questions in mind as we select these tasks, and each of the levels of analysis that we have in MSI is really rich in figuring out if we do these obstacle courses, what might we learn. And I think in talking, especially with the core 3 group, not only do we want to see how they do the tasks in a laboratory situation, but we want to have a better understanding of what their choices might be based on their capacities. So I bring all of that context in because all of us are going to be looking at movement in very different levels, and we're working away from steady state motion into unsteady motion. So bring that into the conversation. I know it's take also a little bit of time to introduce yourself, what you're where you are, what you're working on, and what your interest is in this. And then we'll give you about 20 minutes, check in on you at 20 minutes to see if you need more time. And the idea is to brainstorm what these activities might be, talk about the why behind it, and then report back about what you're learning to the rest of the groups. So we'll ask each of you to chime in the next 20 minutes. So have fun with this. Be creative. Feel free to try out your recording devices if you need to. Don't worry about that so much right now, but we'll talk a little bit more about how we'll do the collective videos later. So have fun.
All right. So does group 1 want to report out? Did you all designate a reporter? Or does anyone in
I don't
any
even
group
know
want-
who's group 1, so
Huh?
I think I was in group 1. Lena,
Oh,
do you
okay.
want to talk? But Victoria, you might be able to tell us if we.
I should have written that down. Room 1, I think, did have Jill in it. Yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So Lena, would you like to talk about your balance capacity assessment with the beam walking? I know we've talked about this before, but we were just talking about our narrowing balance beam assessment in which there's 6-foot sections of beam that go from about a foot wide, and there's 4 different widths, and it ends at about half an inch wide. It's basically standard wood sizes from Home Depot. Our particular motivation was to stratify individuals' balance capacity across a wide range of abilities and disabilities. So we've tested people with Parkinson's. It was originally, Andrew Soares tested it with prosthesis users. And we've tested it on a variety of dancers, modern dancers, partner dancers, ballet dancers. And the reason we control the conditions so people cross their arms. And then what you do is report back the distance that people get before they need to step off. And that gives us one measure in which we can have a number that allows us to compare across vastly different balance abilities. And so far, typically these clinical scales have ceiling and floor effects. We ask people to cross their arms so that they're all using kind of similar strategy. And then the number doesn't depend on the strategy that they're used, how much the arms are involved, even though it's not a very naturalistic situation, because this is an assessment and not a study of how people most effectively traverse a beam. And then we use those numbers to corroborate with other experiments that we do where we measure brain activity and muscle activity and want to know the differences across these different abilities and differences.
Excellent.
And we discussed, and there are instances where we have actually studied muscle activity and some kinematics while traversing the beam, demonstrating sort of ballet dancers using the same strategies that they do for overbound, and other people having to like explore movement, let's say, while they're traversing the beam. But we are quite limited in the things that we've actually in the study of the movements while people are on the beam.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. All right. Any discussion about a beam task? I love beam tasks. Anybody have any other thoughts about a beam task? Okay, so go ahead.
I'll chime in. Can you all hear me?
Sure, James.
Okay, this is James from the USC group. So there are a group of about 9 of us here in a room, but we're using my laptop and don't have good video. So we also had an idea for looking at a balance beam as well as a way to both challenge balance, but also potentially induce, let's say, anxiety or sort of, I guess that's the best term, where you might look at having a balance beam that's different heights above the ground. We'd have to think about doing that in a way that is safe, but even if it's not very narrow and you raise it off the ground, that might be a way to look at how people move when, when there's that sort of possibility of a large fall, even if the probability is really small.
So I actually, in my research for my PhD, we would test like astronauts and people after like centrifuge studies in these types of tasks. And beams would not be safe for people with like a gravity transition involved, but we would do tandem walks, which would get like a similar kind of test, but wouldn't be as like dangerous when you have that poor of balance. That might be like an easier portable thing, but I agree that the like anxiety that and like the decision-making process when there's a beam and height involved is really interesting there.
Yeah, and this is a little bit more complicated, but people have also done this with VR, where you use simulated height, so you don't have the actual risk of injury, but it generates a very similar feeling of anxiety.
How do you scale, like, in the VR situation, is there a way to quote add cost or risk where it counts, maybe in a gaming situation or any
Um,
you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
consequences of some sort that no one gets hurt.
Yeah, so there are several different ways that you can. So this gets back to maybe the discussion about the objective of the task. So we can in VR create an objective, whether it's gamifying it by giving you points for finishing the course in a certain amount of time, adding penalties when you have errors or let's say foot placements that are off a given target. So there are ways that we can construct an objective function basically, and penalize people based on how they perform or reward people. So that's another discussion about how you motivate behavior. So all those things are possible.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
James, are you measuring like skin conductance or something when people are exposed as a measure of like stress or anxiety?
So I had a student last year who was starting to do some of that. This isn't particular to VR, but it's for studies we do with similar to what you all do, where we were doing perturbations during treadmill walking. So we were looking at one of the goals was to see how measures of skin conductance change in response to perturbations of different size. This was a high school intern who we had who left, and we haven't picked up the project. The nice thing is that they're pretty good skin conductance sensors. You can get that, you can just interface with like an Arduino for really, really cheap. But that's something that I think is a really great measure of, anxiety.
Excellent. I've used the skin sensors. It's gotten much better, but when I first started using them, they were a little messy. The data was a little convoluted. You had to have really set time periods of when you were looking for the change. Um, all right, another group.
I think there was another group with Kisa in it.
So unfortunately, I have to run away to a meeting with our VP for research to find out about my funding for the next period of time. But Kristen, Ilana, and Caitlin I took notes, I left them with Caitlin. I'm sure that they can report back on what we talked about, which was really fun. So sorry, I'll try and get back to the meeting as soon as I can, but I don't know if I'm going to be out for the rest of the duration, but yeah.
Thanks. Good luck.
So you have lots of energy for that combo.
Yeah.
All right, does someone from y'all's team want to talk?
I just need 1 second to make sense
No
of
worries.
the notes here before I
No
start
judgment.
talking about
I
it.
can, yeah, I can dive in while Caitlin's reading Keison's handwriting. One of the major things that we talked about was ways that you could sort of get at someone's capacity to do different tasks. And it came from my background as an athlete where we did a lot of ladder drills as part of training, and you could do that. We obviously bought the ladder itself, but you could also just put tape on the ground, which would make it very easy to be able to do sort of anywhere you want to go. And with that, if you could basically think of a task, you could do it. And if you think about inter-individual variability or across people who have different functional capacities, you could just do like a forward task and a backwards task where most people in their everyday lives don't have to walk backwards. And so you may see a lot of functional differences between populations in those different tasks. Caitlin, I'll see if you have any other notes in there.
Yeah, we kind of had started talking about balance and limb asymmetry, so hopping tasks on dominant versus non-dominant legs. And then we had started going into, like functional tasks, like stepping up on stairs successively of different heights to see kind of how the strategy changes when maybe the height of the step is increased or decreased, going upwards or downwards, and etc. And yeah, the ladder, the agility ladder with the tape on the ground, I think is where we had kind of stuck a little bit.
Can I ask a question about the ladder drills and what what you're learning from them maybe, and what the value is in terms of how that particular assessment gives insight to the other activity you're interested in with that group. So say, for example, if you're a soccer player and you're warming up with a ladder drill, you see this all the time. So what is what is the intention of doing that task in terms of the value add to the performance of upcoming soccer performance? Versus maybe as a researcher, what you might learn about the coordination strategies, balance, impulse generation, combination of trade-offs, those kind of things by doing a ladder task. So explore that a little bit more for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a soccer player, it is you would see it during warm up. I played hockey, and so we did it for warm up as well. And it's in a lot of ways, the different tasks that you can do within a ladder may mimic some of the tasks that you're going to have to do on the field. Whether it's a quick cutting maneuver, it also is just a way to athletes get in their heads. I fully admit that this totally happens. It's a way to like get your feet moving fast and like just sort of like warm up your body, warm up brain neuromuscular connections, and how much of that is physiological versus just in your brain, I think is something that could be very widely explored. But I would say from like a soccer player, like warm up example, that would be where I would see it. I think on the other side of it, as a research assessment, I think sort of similar to the narrowing beam walking test is, do soccer players have synergies or have coordination strategies that are similar across the different drills that you do within the ladder, similar across the ladder versus overground walking, versus you have a naive participant come and do it? What strategies are they doing? Another thing that we talked about is sort of this risk reward or a speed accuracy trade-off, where if you tell an athlete to do that ladder as fast as possible and they're going to be timed and they're going to be ranked, they're going to go and do it as fast as possible and accuracy may diminish. If you tell someone who's naive to it, their accuracy, one, is probably going to be lower than an athlete's, but two, they may rate that speed accuracy trade-off very differently and may not perform it as quickly in order to optimize the accuracy of it. So I think that there's a lot of research questions that you could get at motivation, at strategies, not only coordination strategies of the neuromuscular system, but also just overall the strategy of the individual, by using a ladder, use something similar to that.
I think those are really interesting points you brought up. So I'm going to just throw a couple ideas out here, right? So I always look at warming up as kind of tuning the nervous system for what they're able to do, right? But now you've added some other things of the incentive. We're going to time you and we're going to rank you, and you're going to give this to a bunch of competitive people. Okay, just take that as a moment. And I'm motivated to get my time score up. So what's going to make my ground contacts better? It could have a lot to do with nothing to do with the feet so much as maybe the core stabilization, so you get more out of the ground, right? And if that's part of the warm up, that's actually not a bad thing, I think, because body control is a big thing in injury prevention. If you warm that up and activate the core to get the legs moving faster, that brings up a lot of interesting things that I think translates a lot to especially high velocity gait. And this brings into the ability to do the task along with also maintaining balance, which is a big part of this performance piece, at least from what I see in the elite athlete group. So I think it's very rich, but I think what you've also done is identified how you do the task or where the incentives are may very much change how you have to do that, right? And whether, I don't know, so that brings up a lot of issues, like if we come up with an obstacle course, it might be the same task, but with very different incentives and or competition consequences or something. So That's very cool, very versatile, and adds a lot of dimension. So thank you.
Yeah, the other thing too, just to sort of add on to that too, we also talked about it being a way to test personality types. So similar to some of the work that Monica's done in the birds, is the incentives you give, the instructions you could give could start probing different personality types as well, which we've talked about ways to be able to do that in humans. And I don't think we've settled on a really great assessment of that yet that can really get sort of across these tasks.
Great, thank you.
All right.
I think there was another group with Jordan and the Minds Watch Party and a few others, I think.
That sounds like a rock and roll band.
Yeah.
Jordan in the mind.
Yeah, I'm glad we're going by names because I totally forgot what group number we were. So it was good. I think I was designated to speak. We were cut off right when we were deciding this, but I would say I don't think we got as focused as some of these other groups, but I'm really glad what Kristen was just saying at the end, because what we talked about after realizing that the instructions for the obstacle course were important was part of that, using it to sort of classify people based on how they chose to sort of optimize the course. It started because I mentioned that my cat is the same color as the runner on my stairs. And so when you have like an obstacle that you're not aware of, you know, you step on it and then you try to adjust and not kill it, but also not kill yourself by falling down the stairs. This introduces a really interesting control strategy to your life. So we had a lot of discussion around sort of how do you design an obstacle course that maybe you can get an unexpected obstacle. And then some of this was, you know, you set the obstacle course, you let people do it so many times and get some familiarity with it. And then on, you know, whatever 20th time they do it or something, there's something new on the other side that they can't see. And so then they have to make an adjustment after that. And you can sort of see how they choose to handle that kinematically, or what their reaction strategy is. And then we started talking about like, well, you need to have some instructions, like you could do it like the 6-minute walk test, where it's not necessarily like, you know, walk as fast as you can, but, you know, just walk, see how far you get in 6 minutes. So it sort of gives the person the ability to say, well, I don't want to waste a lot of energy, so I'm not going to do this as fast as I can. But there still is some component of you want to get as far as you can. And so that was where we started leading into these, like using it to sort of assess what are people's, you know, fear avoidance or strategies to handle an unexpected obstacle. You know, maybe they've changed, they've had an injury like an ACL injury where now they have the experience of walking around and randomly they can't control their knee and they fall down. And so does that change how they might approach an obstacle? And so we were talking about leveraging the course to sort of tease some of these things out with sort of this unexpected obstacle idea leading it. So no balance beams in ours.
But I think that brings up an interesting issue, is adaptation to the challenge with some clear objectives, and maybe same thing, different objectives. What do they solve it as? Because that's nice from an experimental point of view, because it's same person, same day, same task, but with different objectives. So how do they make choices there? But I also really like the unexpected hurdle or obstacle or a need to adapt, because you might get some ideas about control weighting and preferences of what choices are being made in decision making, right? And so I think in the core 4 modeling this is a big part of what Christian and Edie are working on, as well as if we know something more about the person and their risk reward, as well as their learning and adaptation to challenges, this is adding a lot more richness. Going back to what Lena talked about is getting to know what the capacities are, but also their decision making, what it might be based on. Because if you know these things as part of your warm up to your research project, you can then better understand why the person might be doing what they're doing in the actual task you're trying to study. So I think I talked to Katie about this a little bit, is a warm up activity that actually allows you to get to know your subjects or participants a little bit better. Recognizing that it might influence what they do, but at least building that into the experimental design piece. Any other thoughts, questions, additions from the rest of the band?
The band.
Jordan and my part.
All right. Should I go ahead and share my screen, Jill?
I think
Yeah, did we get through
one more
everybody?
group.
I think one more
One more
group.
group?
Yep.
I think we might be the last group. It was me,
Okay, I'm so
Vincent,
sorry.
and June. No,
We can't tell.
Yeah, we can tell.
Yeah, so we all had different, backgrounds, and so we were trying to combine our backgrounds, and so we ended up individually talking about what would be of interest. And so my interest, again, is in parasport. So I'm really interested in, okay, what happens when we make an athlete like what Jill had said, make a choice? What happens to their kinematics? What happens to their pressure in their wheelchair? And then now let's add maybe a defensive player, and how does that impact their movement? At a ball, all these little aspects go into how athletes move, and it also goes into clinical applications too. So if you have to make a quick reaction, but you don't, let's say you have Parkinson's and throws your balance off, that can now be a threat to falling, which kind of goes into our earlier conversation of kinesiophobia. So trying to protect your body more or less from injury. And then Vanson, he was talking about coming out of the block as a sprinter. And so kind of more or less the gist was, how do we Moneyball movement? If anybody's familiar with Moneyball, how can we start to analyze these movement patterns that will predict our highest level of performance? So from a coach's perspective, like, it's great for them to know your athlete's healthy, they're not at risk for ACL tear based off of this analysis, XYZ, but they also want to know, what's the percentage for us to be successful on the court? How is this going to lead us to winning a game? How is this going to lead to this athlete coming in first when they come out of the block? So that was more or less our conversations.
I think it's a really interesting question, especially in the para sports area, and looking at classification with the goal of making the competition safe and an equal playing ground. I think in working with some of the para athletes, some of the modifications into their nervous system and other things may actually lend itself to be a plus rather than a minus in terms of control and things like that. It just depends on the task, the person, and the role in the sport itself. But there's a lot of discovery in that space. And you also have very motivated participants in that space, which makes for co-creating together on what tasks and what activities, and involving the participant, because they may know better than you will in terms of what research questions could actually be answered based on what they know about their capabilities and the current state of their capabilities. I think you also brought in the chat too about aging and disability as we age, and getting up there in numbers. For me, it's definitely an issue. So welcome to the process. We're all going to end up in a adapted or modified state eventually, and I think these are really important as we design the world we're moving in, for both safety and performance aspects. So it's very rich in that space.
All right.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
I think yeah, that'd be cool.
There you go.
So I think this is really helpful to talk in groups about this. And so for kind of our final breakout room, and it might be kind of a lightning round but we've got some really rich conversations here, is to think about like something very specific like hopscotch. And I don't know if you've all played hopscotch. So I listed the rules here where you basically have to, you start still, throw a marker on a square, and then you have to hop through it, but you can't land on the square that has the marker in it. And you go through the whole process. I was also amazed to find out that the world's record was 1 minute and 2 seconds. So I'm like, I don't know how they did that, but we're not going for the world record. But think of an activity like this where you're going to hop, single leg hop, double leg hop, a hop and turn at the end. There's a balance issue of picking up the marker and picking it up as you go past. So you have to be on one leg and reach down and pick it up. But even just taking a simple course like this, hopscotch, what all do you think you might learn by the series of tasks that you might put together in a obstacle course? Because you talked, and how that might give a better picture of your participants' capacities, like you're saying, their personalities, their risk reward, the evidence of previous experience and such like that. So in our next breakout group, maybe we can talk specifically about how you would like to modify the IMSI hopscotch court and or tasks and or objectives, and see if we can maybe try something like this out. So we'll go back to breakout groups and talk about it and then report back.
And maybe 10 minutes or 8
Yeah,
minutes?
it's gonna be
8
right
minutes?
in, yeah.
All right, these will be quick. I'll send you
Yeah.
guys back to your breakout rooms now.
So being mindful of time, I think we should jump right into the discussion.
Yep.
Anyone want to start?
Let's do the same order just to keep us going.
Yep, exactly. Go ahead.
Emily or whoever is it,
Emily.
go for it.
Yep.
I may have been digressing and not actually answering the question that was asked. But we talked about just generally the importance of game or play in these tasks that we're giving. So two specifically in two different directions, like when you're playing a game, you're kind of tricking your brain into changing your focus. And in my experience, that leads to better performance. But that whereas, like, for example, Kristen's ladder task, like you can focus on the task itself. If we, in a game like hopscotch, you may be executing some of those exact same tasks, but in the context of a game, your outcomes may be very different. And then the other thing we talked about also was another way to kind of trick the brain a little bit and to observe different performance is to tell people they're getting a trial run when they're not actually getting a trial run. Like how, so someone like Kristen or me, who are maybe a little bit hyper competitive, if you give them a task, they're going to do it at 110%. But if I tell you, okay, this is a trial run, it doesn't count, how do you approach that? And what does that tell us about the strategies you choose and about how you learn?
Okay, excellent. I like that approach. Next group.
I think we had the USC team.
Yeah, I like that idea.
James.
Are they still here?
Yes, we're still here. We're just deciding who's going to speak up.
Oh, you didn't decide who the reporter was going to be.
No, we didn't.
No,
Okay.
Okay.
well, I can, my interpretation of the instructions was an idea around, again, how do you introduce the task, or how these different tasks are introduced, could provide some insight into learning capacity. So individuals' capacity to acquire a new skill. Some will, after a couple of trial runs, will be able to produce something highly accurate, say, versus someone who takes more time. And that's another dimension of capacity in the ability to acquire a new skill or refine a new skill.
So I think you're capturing some of the learning aspects of this
Yeah.
too, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking about that with dancers practicing things at quarter time or halftime or double time. Yeah. So that's that.
All right, next group.
I think that's our group. And I think it'll surprise no one, especially Emily at this point, that I got hyper focused on the world record of hopscotch and how they achieved it. But to me, like it came down to our discussion largely focused on a question of like the person's overall strategy, and that may also be indicative of their confidence in the task and their confidence in their ability. In sort of two different aspects of it, of did they decide to go for the furthest box first? Did they decide to go for a closer box earlier on? Not only in their sort of confidence in their throwing ability, but also as we think about fatigue, if you have to hit all of the boxes, like what overall strategy is the person using to accomplish the task as fast as possible? And how does that strategy differ from person to person?
There might be a link there between what they know of themselves, right? That's kind of the expression there. Very cool.
Excellent.
So-
Is it time for the band yet?
Yeah.
The it's a funk metal band.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
gonna play off of your last name too a little bit, but yeah. Especially what we're talking about, balance, sturdy. Anyway, go ahead.
So yeah, I had to look up the rules for hopscotch while the rest of my band was discussing things, because I didn't actually know there were rules.
Yeah.
So this is cool. We sort of what we settled on was the idea of like having somebody do it and getting their steady state, like seeing how they do it in repetition. And a couple of things you can get from that is when they have the opportunity sort of to switch which single leg foot they're hopping on. Do they switch, or do they always go back to the same like dominant foot or something like that to hop on? Or do they switch maybe to like, spread out the fatigue onto both legs? And so, you can get this, assess some sort of steady state, and from that you can perturb it either by forcing them to like alternate feet when they hit the double squares, or to always hop on their other foot, or to like, change which square they're skipping is in after they've gotten like sort of used to a certain pattern. Getting at some of those like learning aspects. How do you handle this, like forcing you to do something you're not used to? How does that incur more errors, or like increase the time it takes you to do the task?
All right, great. And then we have one last group.
I think Hannah, that was your group somewhere.
Yeah, Hannah and I was the last group, but we
Okay.
our discussion was mostly focused on like balance because of just how much of like a role it plays in the game. So we discussed how like you could put like a force plate on the layout of the hopscotch board on the ground, and then kind of analyze where like the pressure of the foot is like landing and like holding when people are trying to find their balance, and then also like hop to the next square, and then just using that to or like comparing that with like success and performance to see like where is the most optimal like place on the foot to kind of land from and then hop from to like optimize the success on the task.
Yeah, so the challenge in these pop-up arenas is to try to measure what we can, right? Whether it's sensors or these time-stamped synchronized iPads or the drone above or these kind of things. And one of the things we learned, and this came actually from Wheelchair Ireland, is use the tree principles, which you guys are all playing with, which is T for technique, how you need to do the tasks, whether it's on your dominant, non-dominant, those kind of things, changing up the rules, changing the equipment, or changing the environment. Things like, okay, let's do hopscotch, but let's put a sheet over top where you can't touch the sheet, right? So now are you going to hop, but yet not touch the sheet? Those kind of things, right? So there's ways you can constrain or require the adaptation you're searching for by switching up the intention, the technique, the rules, the equipment, and the environment. And so that ends up being a really nice framework to think about what all you could learn with same task, but just kind of changing the instructions, right? Or the constraints. So hopefully we've gotten you guys thinking. I know we have 1 minute left. So this was perfect. I'm glad we had time together and to meet everybody, especially as we're starting our Summer Institute projects. But thank you. We will ask people to add to our video library of ideas. So you now have a low-tech way of actually collecting some of the movements that you come up with. So we may tap into you as the summer goes on. And we have a Google Drive in the pop-up arena where you can put some of your ideas. So we hope that you'll contribute in that way. I think there's one more QR code that we
Yes.
need to share for evaluating or giving feedback on the workshop, but we really appreciate you guys thinking flexibly today and coming up with some really good ideas for our group to consider. So we look forward to co-creating with you in the future.